finally, for this evening, I'm going to say a few words on this paper, Bento, Kambur, and Laird, on carbon offsets. So this is related to the clean development mechanism in a way. So here instead we're thinking, instead of Kyoto, we've got some emissions trading area, some, what do you call it? I can't find the name for it, I'm getting tired. But we've got a trading scheme anyway with emissions permits. And then there's sectors which are outside the scheme, where there's potentially very cheap abatement to be done. What could those sectors be? Well, typically the trading scheme will be for point sources, like the big power stations and so on. The sectors outside could be forestry, agriculture, and so on, where it's very hard to measure the emissions and so on. But notwithstanding the measurement difficulties and so on, we still know that in the planner's solution there'd be plenty going on in those other sectors, the so-called uncapped sectors. So could we bring them into it somehow? And the idea of offsets is that the emitting sources, instead of buying permits from other emitters, can get credits by paying emitters outside the scheme to reduce their emissions. And then basically in some way you have to convince the regulator that they really are making reductions compared to their baseline. And the problem is, what is the baseline? So let's see what they say about this. This form of cost containment may break the cap if the mitigation from the uncapped sources would have happened in the absence of the program. So if they would have reduced their emissions anyway, then this is just a way of getting around the program, isn't it? And this is called non-additionality. And of course the basic problem is that we just don't know what would have happened in business as usual, because it's hypothetical here. We pay them to do something, something happens, but what would have happened if we hadn't paid them? We can never know for sure. Okay. And of course, you could say, look, we want to achieve these emissions reductions. We don't care that much about costs. We shouldn't allow this kind of thing because there might be cheating. But could it not be the case that if you could find mechanisms that allowed cheaper compliance, it would then be politically feasible to achieve more restrictive caps and thus lower emissions? So when you look at it that way, this suddenly seems like a much better idea. Okay, it's not just a way for emitters to reduce their costs and get round the scheme and potentially cheat on the scheme, but it's also a way to get political acceptability for tougher regimes. Okay. Let me just pause. Yeah, I think I'm going to cut to the chase here, and having given you the introduction, I'm going to give you the main result, which is that according to their analysis, the best thing to do is a combination of two things. You have really stringent baseline estimates of business as usual. Okay, so you're really conservative in business as usual estimates, so that you're not going to be attributing, when you measure actual emissions, you can be pretty sure, if you claim that they are lower than business as usual, you can be pretty sure that they really are lower. And in fact, you're much more likely to be underestimating the actual abatement. Because if you're going to be super stringent and careful with your BAU and say, well, BAU probably involves a reduction anyway, then you may actually be underestimating the true reduction. So, which, if you're consistently underestimating true reduction, that is going to make participation in this program unattractive. Okay, because why would you do this if the regulator then just turns around and says, oh, but you haven't actually reduced compared to BAU, you can't have any permits. You put all this effort in and cost and you don't get any permits. So if you're going to go with this very stringent baseline policy, it turns out, in their simulations, you should combine it with a very generous permit policy. You actually have a trading ratio such that you get more than one, a trading ratio which is kind of more generous than 1 to 1, so that a measured abatement compared to this stringent baseline of 1 unit actually counts for slightly more than 1 permit in the capped market. I'm not going to go into the math behind that, or the theory, or the empirics. Okay. I just want to give you an idea of the kind of analysis that's going on in this field. And that's all I'm going to say on this paper